So I'm going to do as follows. I'm going to talk about the legal aspects, and I'm going to share some screenshots or just some websites to get us a sense of where we are, so I can route my talk based on some of those images and charts that I'm going to share. So is that okay?
Sure.
All right, so I'll start off with the first one here. Give me a second. After all these years in Zoom, 2 years in Zoom, we should all be very handy with this, but we are not. At least I'm not. So here we go. Let's try this one.
Sure.
So I want to play this chart. It just gives us a sense of what has been some of the annual emissions since 1950. Can everyone see this?
Yes, it's visible.
To kind of look at the four major emitters or some of the major emitters and see how emissions have grown, and also locate India in this picture, right? And this goes until 2020. So if you take a minute, what you'll see is, of course, there have been pretty drastic changes in the emissions of both United Kingdom and United States and of China. But if you look at India, it's not been so dramatic. And I emphasize this because we need to place all countries in the context of their emissions, including India, in terms of expectations as to what should be done by all of these countries, right? And that's what comes down to the heart of justice. You've asked me to speak about institutionalizing climate justice today. And when we talk about institutionalizing climate justice, I think about it as, how do we put in place norms, rules, and institutions, literally institutions, organizations that can bridge the gap between those who have benefited, those who continue to benefit, will continue to benefit from these emissions, and those that will not. And that gap between the beneficiaries and the non-beneficiaries of climate change is currently enormous and appalling, right? It's truly appalling just how few people are going to benefit from climate change at all. And the question for us really is, how do we bridge this? Is enough being done? So I want to show one more chart, and then I will launch, and then you'll wish I kept on showing you charts, because then I'll keep talking. So if you give me a minute here, can everyone see this? The map?
No, actually, we can still see the older chart.
Is this the new one?
Yeah, not yet.
I think you have to stop sharing first and then share the new one again.
Oh, got it. Yes.
Okay.
I found it.
It was
Thank
visible
you.
now, but yeah.
All right. So this gives you the overall picture, and here's where we are in India, right? It's been going up, but if you can look at the map, both in terms of the global scale and the scale in India, you can just get an immediate sense of which are the countries with higher emissions and which are the ones with lower emissions. I'll stop this very quickly and move to my next one, which is vulnerability, right? So where are we in terms of vulnerability? So this is a report that was compiled by HSBC. And as you can see, India is number one. This is from 2018. So it's been 2 years and 4 years now. But of course, with COVID, we probably haven't seen many updates, but it has not been that long. So India is number one in terms of countries that are highly vulnerable to climate change, right? So I promised to bring this together. And I want to share with you just two more screens. This one is the UNDP's HDI ranking of countries. So you can see India is at number 131, and it has been improving steadily since 1990. But you can see we have not made so much gains, right? it is not something to be dismissed, right? I come from India. I've lived in India all my life. I grew up in India. So I will not dismiss any progress that we have made, because we know what the complexity of the problem is in terms of bridging this gap. But look at the position of India. It's at 131, right? So we have been talking in the global context about how important it is to India to reduce emissions, and it is absolutely important. But we have to really think about, where are we in this scheme of development? Where are we today, right? Finally, I just want us to look together at this screen, where we're going to look at just an evaluation of progress made in different countries when it comes to climate change and the national net zero target design. And as you can see, about 4 countries have an acceptable scoring on different aspects, and there's a whole list of criteria based on which these scores are given. You have another 4 countries which have average rating, and you have yet another 4 countries that have a poor rating. Among them, China, which is the largest greenhouse gas emitter at this point, right? And if you look at India, we do not have enough information yet, nor do we have it for some of the high fossil fuel producing nations such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We really don't have enough information, so you can't even make an assessment, right? And finally, and I'll give a final snapshot for India, and it is this. This is our wealth gap, right? In a picture. If we had to talk about what is our wealth gap, this is what it looks like. 1% will own this, 9%, 50, 40%, and here's the 50%, right? So I think when we look at institutional climate justice, where do we begin? I think all these slides that all these charts and images that I've shared with you kind of show us just how big the scale is of climate justice. So what I would like to do today is offer a perspective on 3 things. The first thing is focus not only on the important aspects of technology, carbon neutrality, right, and net zero, but ask the question, has the harm not already been done? And what is this model that we are following today? Is it trickle down or is it trickle up? And if it's trickling up, then what about the people who have lost and who will lose? And that is an answer for law, right? When we set out a political system, a country built on a constitution, built on certain principles, what we have done is we've promised that it's going to be working for almost everyone, right? And nobody expects we're all going to be rich, we're all going to have the same income, we're all going to have, everything is going to look the same. I think nobody's naive enough, right? Some people are born beautiful, some are born intelligent, blah, 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 right? But there is a measure where there's a scale of equity that just needs to be maintained. And I think with climate change, that threshold has not been anywhere close to being met. So the first problem, I think, is how we define at the international level what countries are permitted to do. And our legal system, and this has, I think, been a problem for decades in the global international scenario. Our international system allows and goes ahead and says, well, it's up to the nations to decide what commitments they undertake. And so we are not going to do anything that's not in the interest of our country. But if you look at all the charts, the question we have to ask ourselves is, are you doing enough in the interest of the country, right? How do you justify the massive amounts of loss that people are going to suffer and yet find that you're doing enough for the country? Of course, the reality check, people will come in and say, yeah, but who is going to feed the people who lose their jobs in the coal sector, for instance? And it's a very real question. It's a very real question, but it's also not a fair question, or it's not a fair defense to refuse to take ambitious action and ask the tough question, are we doing enough? And also, secondly, at the national level, there is not enough happening. So we have not seen the kind of energy transitions take place at the national level for the past couple of decades. And we would like to say, okay, it's happening now, but we very well know that it is it's dependent on the political climate. If you have a group of countries with a political climate that favor climate action, that is going to take place. And if there isn't, there's going to be kind of business as usual, even though countries posture to go ahead and take action. So what has happened over the past couple of years, especially in Europe and also in United States, is that increasingly people have turned to litigation. And people have started filing lawsuits in front of courts and have started asking the question, are you doing enough? And this has been successful to the extent that there are laws that courts have been willing to interpret to provide remedy to people and to provide relief to people. But what about cases where the courts cannot provide a remedy? So let's talk about India, for instance. So this is coming from an Indian perspective because I am from India. So when I first got into this field, the first question I asked myself was, what will happen to the people, right? We have a very innovative and well-known system of public interest litigation in India. And the first question I asked myself was, so let's say somebody goes to the court and asks the Indian judiciary to provide a remedy for climate change. What remedy could that court provide? What would it ask India to do? We just now saw what the emissions trajectory looks like, right, in India versus other countries. And then you think about that in the context of the vulnerability and in the context of the HDI and the development index. And then you talk about the internal gaps in wealth distribution. What is a judiciary to do? Can it even start providing a remedy without completely entering into policy making, which it is not equipped to make? And so where do we stand today is at a point where there is going to be a massive failure of the rule of law, a massive failure of the rule of law. And of course, coming from India, I know this doesn't sound, very terrifying, right? Because we go on, right? We manage. And when we talk about adaptation, if there is a silver lining in all of this, in India, people are used to adapting all the time. You adapt. If your electricity doesn't come on, you adapt. If something goes wrong, you adapt, right? If you're good at something, it's at adapting. But the question we have to ask ourselves at this point, and one, I think a gap that we need to fill is to see where should India's leadership go? Which direction should it head? Which other direction should it head? And one of the other directions I think it should head in is not just asking for money, right? Like our keynote speaker very, succinctly put it, we don't want to be seen just as another, developing country, right? There's that pride of nations, but we are, and it's not a fault of ours. It's a historical. There are historical reasons why countries are poor. It's not an aberration. It did not happen because countries only mismanaged or just countries were formed poor. We know historically there have been colonization, a past of colonization, because of which we know we are where we are because of deliberate policies that have been taken and ignored at the international level. So the leadership, we need to really look at it, ask who is going to pay, and why should we be joining the conversation midpoint and ignore the past? Why should we not ask, why aren't you paying loss and damages? So which brings us to Glasgow. And what happened in Glasgow? No country wanted to commit. I know I'm going to stop, right?
Yes,
okay, yes. I'll wrap up, right? In Glasgow, we didn't commit on loss and damages, right? And so to wrap up, I will end with one positive observation, which is recently the Human Rights United Nations Human Rights Commission adopted a resolution recognizing a human right to clean air, clean and safe environment. And I think we are at a starting point where instead of looking at it only from the sovereign perspective of nations, we have started the journey to look at it from the human perspective. And I think if we are to achieve justice in the long run, we need to put human rights or rights of people and how they will be affected at the middle and set up institutional frameworks around it. I'll stop there. Thank you.